I do want to start with a programming note. At 9 p.m. Eastern Time, I am going to be doing a live stream with Reverend Starkiller talking about the Brazilian election. And I don't know what time we're going to end, but it could be that it won't even be that long because I think the results are supposedly supposed to come in around 6 p.m. And I guess by 9 it'll already be pretty much decided, apparently. But that was when he was available. And I guess there will be possibly 2 or 3 other streams this week, but the only one confirmed yet will be the one with Ryan Belrose on Wednesday. Ryan is he's a Métis Canadian activist from Alberta, Canada, active in a lot of indigenous rights issues up there, but also he apparently is a very pro-Israel person who debates people with the BDS movement. Now, if somebody objects to that, if somebody wants to offer a countering viewpoint, you're welcome to come on, or perhaps come on separately. I'm not really telling people not to come on with their views. It's pretty much whatever you want. Now, today, the big story is, of course, the aftermath of the Jewish community shooting, the synagogue shooting, actually, over in Pittsburgh. And I happen to be Jewish, and I actually went to the synagogue today, and there was a cop there, and that's going to be the reality from now on. And we're talking about, other people are figuring out that now it's enough talking, and we're going to have to get together and protect ourselves. I don't think everybody thinks that, but there's people who have been thinking about it for a long time, and I think it's just going to be a much bigger shift towards that way of thinking. So if people are starting to believe, gun control is going to come back, I can wager with you. I can absolutely wager with you that there's going to be a lot of people who will start to quietly begin, buying firearms, possibly training as, maybe doing unarmed combat training as well. Of course, you don't know what's going to happen, but it's becoming less and less of a taboo subject. But let's talk a little about Gab.ai. The user is a former, or I guess his account has been canceled, but he is a Gab.ai user. And Andrew Torba says that Joyent, Gab's new hosting provider, has just pulled the hosting service. They have given us until 9 a.m. on Monday to find a solution. Gab will likely be down for weeks because of this. Working on solutions, we will never give up on defending speech for all people. I stand on the same side as Torba. I stand on the same side as everybody who has been sort of thrown out of the mainstream of social media. And unfortunately, some of those people happen to be not the greatest people. What do you want? But I was discussing with a friend earlier, another person who converted to Judaism, who happens to be Irish originally, German-Irish, like Tom Hagen from The Godfather. And we were both in full agreement for, even though that happens quite often, that this issue of suppressing people and censoring them and telling them you can't be on Yelp anymore, you can't be on whatever you're talking about, you can't publish your book on Amazon, you can't you can't have your blog anymore on Medium, you can't have your Twitter account, you can't have a Google Plus account, whatever. I think they're phasing out Google Plus, so who cares? Or you're banned from YouTube, whatever it may be. That is actually never going to solve anything. In reality, eventually people do find a place that will host whatever it is they want to put out, even if it's very distasteful stuff or even things that are beyond distasteful. They threaten people's lives. Those things happen, and the more you push them into the dark corners of the web, the harder it is to actually keep track of them. You have to realize that eventually, how many social media platforms are the police and various surveillance apparatus is supposed to monitor. Are we really going to invest all that money into looking up people who have these dark recesses of their souls? And if you're going to say, well, we have to do everything possible in order to save the lives of people, I would say that the best way to save the lives of people, and this is echoing the thoughts of Styx Hexenhammer, who actually had a pretty good stream with this guy named Shlomo Gordon today. Although I'd have to say, I probably, in all humility, I think I would have done a better job than Gordon. But, I think he has a little more of a profile since he's affiliated with a political party in Israel. But they were talking about the fact that this censorship and this abridging of people's freedoms is not in line with anybody's real plan on how to actually keep anyone safe. The best way to keep people safe is to keep yourself safe first, and then help the others around you. And it's not done by censoring people. It's not done by telling people that it's anti-Semitic to criticize George Soros, who, by the way, I condemn in the fullest. I don't see why, because he happens to have been of Jewish ancestry, but in point of fact, he actually betrayed his own people several times over a long period during the war. Well, why is it that we cannot criticize a person because he happens to share some sort of ancestral heritage with me? It's the same as if you were to tell these black people, well, now you can't criticize Kanye West at all. Kanye West happens to be, or when they say the same thing, a lot of them criticize, what's that guy? John Legend for having an interracial marriage. It's like, well, I mean, if we're going to apply the same standards to people who criticize George Soros, to other people of other races, it would be so absurd up front that people would abandon it totally. What about Enrique Iglesias and Ana Kournikova? Should the Mexicans criticize Enrique Iglesias because he happens to have some sort of, he is married to Ana Kournikova? So are you going to start holding them accountable to their? So when you criticize Ana Kournikova, are you being Russophobic because she might have married Enrique Iglesias? It's ridiculous. You should be able to criticize people on the merits of whatever it is they do. I happen to think that George Soros made his choice long ago. That he doesn't actually support anything related to his Jewish heritage. He happens to be actually very hostile to it. So instead of policing people, I think you should be able to say things that are are abhorrent, even if they make people squirm and cringe about it. And then therefore the debate over the ideas takes place. That's the same reason I say that you shouldn't be calling for Louis Farrakhan to be banned from Twitter. Some people are saying, why are these people being banned from Twitter while Louis Farrakhan remains on Twitter? I say let all of them remain on Twitter. I say that everybody should be able to basically spew their nonsense on Twitter, whether it's Farrakhan, whether it's people. Look, I've criticized individuals on the right. I've criticized Laura Loomer, if you've seen my recent videos. So I would say that, I think even in my last video, I technically criticized Anthony Brian Logan, who's a YouTuber that I talk to on an almost weekly basis. So, and I didn't do it out of malice. I didn't do it because I dislike him on a personal level. When you talk about somebody, when you criticize things that they do, it doesn't necessarily have to be in order to tear them down and reduce them to a pile of ashes. Okay, that's not the reason that you have social media. That's not the reason that we have avenues for expressing our opinions. And the same thing happened over the past couple of months with Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad. People were saying, well, why are you hopping on to Jordan Peterson because he happens to be your friend? Well, Gad Saad said it perfectly. He said that just because Peterson is his friend doesn't mean he can't criticize him. In fact, if he was to not criticize him and pretty much ignore everything he does and offer blind support for everything he does, that's not real true friendship. That's not true friendship in any case. And what I see instead are snakes like this Julia Ioffe, who writes for GQ magazine, and it says she is currently at work on a book about Russia. I wonder in what relation that would be. And she says political rhetoric matters, and he has had some unfortunate things to say about the Jews. Well, the title is How Much Responsibility Does Trump Bear for the Synagogue Shooting in Pittsburgh? In the hours after the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, President Trump's allies were at pains to point out that Robert D. Bowers, the alleged shooter, was in fact anti-Trump. Never mind that the Bowers disliked Trump because he felt he was too soft on the, well, that's the K word. I think I might get banned for this, but the K word infestation, he wrote online, using a slur for Jews. Trump is a globalist, not a nationalist, Bowers wrote on one of his social media accounts. But to the president's defenders, this was a hopeful moment, one they could use to separate Trump from the carnage at Tree of Life. Well, so what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that that you want to connect him to it. So you want to. This is exactly what people who are like prostitutes, people who work for the press in order to present themselves as the real moral guidance of America. This is what they do. But to the president's defenders, this was a hopeful moment, one they could use to separate Trump from the carnage at Tree of Life. There was an important difference between a shooter who hates Trump, wrote conservative writer David French, and the man who loved Trump, who sent Trump's critics all those pipe bombs. Conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt pointed out that anti-Semitism transcends the right-left divide. In these defenders' minds, this absolves Trump of any guilt. It doesn't, according to her. Trump has had enough to say about the Jews that his supporters may easily make certain pernicious inferences. During the campaign, he joked at a meeting of the Republican Jewish coalition that I wouldn't support him because I don't want your money. I forgot about that one. A campaign era tweet about Hillary Clinton superimposed the Star of David over dollar bills. He said the white supremacist marchers at Charlottesville last year were fine people. After I published a profile of Trump's third wife, Melania, that displeased her and his supporters, all right, deluge me with. So she's taking the reaction of other people to her hit piece on Melania Trump. So other people went up and attacked Julia Ioffe. So that's Trump's fault, apparently. So she makes a personal attack on Trump's wife, and then she complains when people make personal attacks on her. So this is the press pretending that they have a special privilege to inoculate them from criticism. So I'm not saying that people should do this. I'm saying that she's in the business of writing things that piss people off. That's what the press does. When Trump was asked to condemn these attacks by his supporters, he said, I don't have a message for them. That day, my terrified father called me and pointed out that it was the 26th anniversary of our family's arrival in America. Why had we come from the Soviet Union in the first place? My mother tells the story this way. So then she's going to go into this very personal issue. This is something that gets me really, I don't know what to think about this, because there's a lot of people with incredible stories about what happened in the Soviet Union, and yet this Julia Ioffe, she doesn't want to acknowledge that the Soviet Union, which was, they had an all-peoples assembly, was supposed to be composed of all the peoples of the Soviet Union. You have people from Mongolian and Tartar heritage to the Slavs of the West and whatever, and the Caucasus peoples that were more close to the Persians and the Turks. In the midst of all of that, there were Jewish people who were being sent to the gulags for practice of their religion. Okay, and she does get into that. It says the nation was steeped in anti-Semitism in the years after the nation lost 1.5 million of its Jews to the Nazis. Joseph Stalin had ushered in a campaign against rootless cosmopolitans, including Jewish doctors who were supposedly poisoning their Gentile patients. Suddenly, Riva's patients believed the government propaganda that she was trying to poison their children. Her daughter, my grandmother, told me recently that even after watching her parents' execution, surviving 2 world wars and a civil war, this was the closest I've ever seen her to suicide. The campaign continued for decades with Jewish quotas at universities and informal bans on Jews serving in certain politically sensitive professions and constant anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic propaganda. So this is what I'm confused about. If those things were wrong, then shouldn't you be writing full-throated condemnations of the quotas that are happening at universities against East Asian and Indian students? Shouldn't that be, if that was a wrong thing to happen in the Soviet Union, you should oppose that in the US of A as well. But apparently you don't think that there's any correlation between the two. In 1988, the year of my mother's panic, ultranationalist anti-Semitic groups such as Pamyat emerged. They were curated and controlled by the KGB to galvanize the patriotic Soviet masses against the pernicious influences of the pro-Western and heavily Jewish intelligentsia. All of this gave license to casual anti-Semitism in daily life. The state didn't have to tell everyday commuters to call my grandmother a K-word. In Russian, it would be Zhid. In a crowded Moscow subway car, it didn't have to. It had made its preferences clear. Culpability is a tricky thing, and politicians, especially the demagogic variety, know this very well. Unless they go as far as organized, documented, state-implemented slaughter, they don't give specific reasons. They don't have to. They simply set the tone. In the end, someone else does the dirty work, and they never have to lift a finger, let alone stain it with blood. I saw it while reporting on Russia, where after unexpected pro-democracy protests and the annexation of Crimea, Putin created an environment so vicious, so toxic, he called his critics national traitors in the fifth column, that when assassins killed opposition leader Boris Nemtsov at the foot of the Kremlin walls in 2015, it was easy for people to blame the divisive political rhetoric as if it were a spontaneous weather pattern, rather than Putin himself for creating it. And everyone understood immediately the message it sent. Dissent is a deadly business. Putin may not have ordered Nemtsov's assassination, but Russia's elite could clearly see he wasn't too upset about the outcome. When I was faced with the anti-Semitic outrage of Trump supporters defending Empress Melania, I saw it clearly. Should Trump win the election, his followers, some of whom threw the K word around as happily as they used the N word, would be heartened and empowered, and they would quickly surpass the gas chamber Twitter memes they were then deploying. In the 2.5 years that followed, Trump's tune has become a deafening roar. So that she just goes on and on and on. And I would like to say this, okay? The fact is that despite all of her griping and despite all of her stuff about her personal family experience and everything, she hasn't moved to any of the tolerant countries that you want to know why? If you move to Canada, if you move to France, all these countries that are run by people who are on the other side, they reject the populist nationalist message. The situation is even worse for Jewish people. If you go to, I can tell you from people I know that when they go to France, they don't tell people that they're Jewish. Okay, when they go to Germany, they don't tell people that they're Jewish. When they go to Britain, which is under Theresa May, another person who is part of the liberal international order, they don't tell people that they're Jewish. So why are you trying to make this statement that this is an American issue, that this parallels what happened in the Soviet Union, that this is you're basically creating this. What goes unsaid is that if it's not safe here, it's not safe anywhere. And the fact is that in this country, as opposed to in France, where you basically have to depend on police and the military to guarantee your safety, okay? Over here, the government does allow you the means to buy your own weapons and also train in order to defend yourself, your family, and your property. Okay, so that's really, this is my response to Julia Ioffe, who writes for GQ magazine, which once upon a time was a men's fashion magazine, back before it lost its ever-loving mind. So, there's a piece by David Harsanyi that kind of goes into, here's one. The same Voxers who had long rationalized, romanticized, and excused the Jew-killing terror organizations in the Middle East were now blaming the existence of the evil anti-Semitic Pittsburgh shooter on Republicans. So I'll respond to that. I don't think that necessarily you have to say that you should, this is basically because of hatred of Israel. However, when these people say that, well, what's happening over there is a result of anti-colonial resistance against the Zionist state. That's what they usually say. What do you think that some of these hard right groups, that they're called extreme right, it's debatable whether they are or not, and I'll stand by that. What do you think they read out of that? A lot of them themselves echo the same words, and they say, whether they are the white nationalists, some of the black nationalists, they talk all the time about the same statements made by the people, these Voxers, as David Arsani of the Federalist says, that they they mention it all the time. They add to it. They say that the United States is complicit in Jewish oppression and colonialism in the Middle East. And they openly brag about it, and it's part of they merge it into their own traditional anti-Jewish platform, which precedes the whole Middle Eastern conflict. They like to pretend that they're only talking about, they're giving constructive criticism that will that ultimately keeps them, it keeps their hands clean of any terrors of the occupation. Okay, that's how the way they see it. But when people read their articles, they're not reading it in the same context. They're reading it in the context that they're familiar with. And if they already have preconceived notions that they would oppose Jewish Jewish domination of the world, as they would call it, they're not going to distinguish between the motives of the writer and the motives of why they're reading the article. They're going to use it in order to further their own narrative. So that's correct what he's saying. The same pod bros whose echo chambers deployed anti-Semitic dual loyalty tropes to smear critics of the Iran deal were now incredibly concerned about the Jewish community. So that's in reference to David Rhodes, who was trying to make the case that the people who opposed the Iran deal that he was charged with pitching to the media, they are actually less loyal to America than to Israel. Now, I will say that in some cases, he does have a point. But David Rhodes, that doesn't excuse him for being just a complete liar, and the deal itself is based on a complete lie. So you can hardly preach to people that that justifiably can be criticized for. I think that I would say that they're more in bed with the defense contractors and the military-industrial complex. Although there is something to be said about their some of these evangelists and things like that. So you can criticize them, but if you're doing it while promoting this tremendous lie, this ridiculous deal that went nowhere, that was basically giving free goodies to Iran, and by that I mean actual cash, you have no right to actually project onto somebody else. There are many others, and that was bad enough. But others decided to dip into a little victim blaming as well. Hadn't American Jews been a little too Jew-centric and pro-Israel for their own good? So let's see what this one is. This is from, okay, so this guy's deleted his tweet. So somebody actually, let me see if this is visible on archive. So unfortunately, sometimes these idiots say something and then they delete it and then you never know. So I guess we'll check back in a second. Franklin Foer of the Atlantic demanded that Jews finally dispense with their faith, adopt his, and start expelling co-religionists for political opinions. If you want to read about the left's co-opting of American Judaism, I recommend. Okay, so I'll probably check out that book anyway. Wire creator David Simon went bold, embracing a transparent anti-Jewish conspiracy theory, accusing the Israeli government of intervening in American democracy. For those who confuse progressivism with Judaism, which is to say many, it might be difficult to understand that undermining the Democratic Party isn't an act of anti-Semitism. The Trump administration, in fact, has been the most pro-Jewish in memory. Every Jew who's ever prayed understands the importance of Jerusalem in our faith. So I actually thought this guy was Hungarian from his last name, but you can be both Hungarian and Jewish. It was President Trump, who, not any of the other presidents, who promised the same, who recognized Jerusalem as the undisputed Jewish capital, putting an end to the fiction that it's a shared city. So yeah, this guy's tweet, I would have liked to read it. It was Trump who cut more than $200 million in aid. Anyway, he keeps going on and on. So I'm not for people just singing the praises of Donald Trump all day. I'm not for people who blame literally everything on him. But this issue, this shooting at a Jewish house of worship, is not to be blamed on a president who the assailant literally hated. Okay, so I think that for Julia Ioffe and people like that, this is literally the desecrating the name of God. When these people who died in the shooting all happened to be elderly or middle-aged people who were there. I believe they were celebrating some sort of event. It was, like, why would you, who are much younger, why would you suddenly think that you can speak for people who are, they're from a totally different generation and everything? It's ridiculous. It's the same thing I see often from some of these BLM supporters who happen to be, they happen to have, a lot of them are multiracial anyway. And then they want to talk as if they represent generations of people before them who suffered through Jim Crow and through slavery and everything. You can try to preserve their legacy, but the fact is that you don't suffer the same thing as they do. You're not under the same conditions. Things have changed since those eras. Okay, things have changed since the Holocaust here in America. It doesn't mean that we should allow the same thing to happen. That's why we have the Second Amendment. That's why we have the First Amendment. That's why we have the Fourth Amendment. And because of the Fourth Amendment, I would say that this disgusting campaign against Gab.ai, and I think there's going to be more later. I hope that they're not going to go after Minds.com. This means that we have to go out, and I hate to say this, we have to vote for all the people. I'm not going to mention parties, but you can read between the lines. Anybody who is pro-censorship, you have to vote against them. The person that you vote for in every election, every single position, you vote for the person who is most likely to oppose censorship. If that's a libertarian, it's going to be a libertarian. If that's a person of a different party, the GOP, it's a GOP person. If by some miracle, needle in the haystack, you happen to have a Democrat who is anti-censorship, I would say you should vote for that person. Censorship is the biggest threat to American freedom and the future of this country as a state with at least democratic values and accountable government. And that's what's being pushed here. They're not pushing safety. They're pushing censorship, and they're pushing thought policing, and they're pushing emotional policing. And finally, so he does mention the whole issue of the Women's March and Linda Sarsour and everything that they're going and palling around with Louis Farrakhan and everything. And enough people are already talking about that. But I want to ask, so this happened in 2014. Donald Trump hadn't announced he was running for president yet. And he killed 3 people in 2014 at a Jewish center in the Kansas City area in Overland Park. So I want to ask, how come none of you blamed Joseph Biden at the time for what Glenn Fraser Cross did? How come none of you attacked President Obama or Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid at the time? Harry Reid, I believe, was still Senate Majority Leader. You never blamed him. So this is pure political bullshit. And I'm not going to just let it pass and allow people to use the memories of people who obviously, they were taken victim at in their old age at a time when I think that they were hoping to live out the rest of their lives with their families and their grandchildren. This is just pathetic for the people to continue, the people in the media, the Washington Post, MSNBC, and all of those corners of the media to use this in order to promote their blame game. That's about it. Please stick around later tonight, 9 p.m. for Razor Ray Live Wounds. I will post the link below. And we will talk about the Brazil election live. We're going to talk about the results and exactly what happened, whether Bolsonaro wins or not. Although most indications are that he will win. So have a great night, and please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please donate on Patreon for tips. Also, subscribe to the second channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. Comment when it uploads, and we'll see you soon.